Good evening, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring classicist, a wandering author, here to remind you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going over Book 5, Chapter 11 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Here's an interesting question. Can you hurt yourself? Not exactly in those terms, but that's kind of the gist of what Aristotle's getting at here. So, is it possible or not for a man to commit injustice against himself? One class of just actions consists of those acts in accordance with any virtue which are ordained by law. So one type of justice is legal justice. You know, we talk about legal justice all the time. Like if whatever is going on in the news at the time, somebody's going to be talking about legal justice, actually. You don't even have to narrow it down. And that is one type of action, one type of just actions. So, for instance, the law does not sanction suicide. Those are Aristotle's words. So let's see. What does Aristotle think about suicide? Further, when a man voluntarily does an injury that is against the law, he commits injustice. But he who kills himself in a fit of passion voluntarily does an injury which the law does not allow. Therefore, the suicide commits injustice. But against whom? So committing suicide creates an injustice, but who exactly is the injustice against? It seems to be against the state, rather than against himself, so against the government. For he suffers voluntarily, and nobody suffers injustice voluntarily. So it appears that Aristotle believes nobody suffers from injustice voluntarily. I guess basically it's kind of like if you give consent, you know, you're not hurting somebody if they're a masochist. They want it. So that's not an injustice anymore. This is why the state exacts a penalty. Suicide is punished by certain marks of dishonor as being an offense against the state. Moreover, it is not possible to act unjustly toward oneself in the sense in which a man is unjust, who is a doer of injustice, only and not universally wicked. For if it were, it would be possible for the same thing to have been taken away from and added to the same thing at the same time. But this is impossible. Justice and injustice always necessarily imply more than one person. So, anytime that you talk about justice, it's not a singular person. It's multiple or groups. It's an emergent property of group dynamics. That's like what an engineer might say. We do not think that a man acts unjustly if, having suffered, he both does and suffers the same thing at the same time. Again, if a man could act unjustly towards himself, it would be possible to suffer injustice voluntarily. So Aristotle's argument is because you can't voluntarily suffer injustice, then you can't do it on yourself. And that makes sense. The logic is good, sound, logos. Furthermore, no one is guilty of injustice without committing some particular unjust act. But a man cannot commit adultery with his own wife, or burglary on his own premises, or theft of his own property. So you can't cheat with your wife on your wife. Then again, that's, it's paradox. You cannot steal your own stuff, and you can't break into your own house. Yeah, those are good arguments. So it takes two people. Somebody has to do those things to you for there to be injustice. If it's just one person, you can't do it. You can't commit injustice to yourself, even though you can hurt yourself. And generally the question, can a man act unjustly towards himself, is solved by our decision upon the question, can a man suffer injustice voluntarily? So, though both to suffer and to do injustice are evils, for the former is to have less and the latter to have more than the mean, corresponding to what is health-giving in medicine and conducive to fitness and athletic training. Nevertheless, to do injustice is the worse evil, for it is reprehensible, implying vice in the agent and vice in utter and absolute. Thus, in itself, to suffer injustice is the lesser evil. though accidentally it may be the greater. So you could suffer injustice, and it's the lesser evil, but it could be the greater evil. With this, however, science is not concerned. Science pronounces certain circumstances, for example, a sprain, in spite of the fact that in certain circumstances a sprain may be accidentally worse than pleurisy. As for instance, if it should happen that owing to a sprain you fell and in consequence of falling were taken by the chemi and killed. I don't follow that passage entirely, to be quite honest. It seems that what Aristotle was saying is sometimes a sprain could be worse than a disease like pleurisy, like if you fell in a hard or bad spot. No, I mean, it makes sense. In a metaphorical and analogical sense, however, there is such a thing as justice, not towards oneself, but between different parts of one's nature. So, in Aristotle's De Anima, on the soul, he breaks up your nature into three parts. Plato also does a similar thing, and there's like the rational and the irrational, and Aristotle has the third, or there's a vegetative. And those parts, because they're different, those things can commit injustices between each other if you're not like living in harmony, basically, #harmony. Nor it is true justice in the full sense of the term, but such justice as subsists between the head of a household and his wife and children. So it's not exactly the same thing as true injustice, but it's but such justice as subsists between the head of a household and his wife and children. Yeah. Okay. Word. Well, I've got great news. We've completed Book 5 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. We're halfway through the Nicomachean Ethics. And just to remind you what we're building up to here, in Aristotle's Politics, he talks about how to govern society, but he's got one particular book where he talks about revolution, and I think it's a really good book. It's interesting. He just goes over the history and talks about how governments change, and I think that's something that's on a lot of people's minds right now. So he's probably got some wisdom on it. I mean, I've already read it already, but I just for you guys. Anyways, this is a wandering author here, ready to remind you that we're all the authors of our own lives. What are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, I love y'all.